All right, I think we can start.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Here tonight to do a update on the Schweibert dock. As everyone knows, we had some incidents occur. First incident happened on 12/31, which was last New Year's Eve. The first incident, going back to that slide that was just on there, Tim, was the gangway drop down. We received a report that the dock gangway from the Schweibert landing to the docks was not attached and had fallen into the water on December 31st. Public Works was immediately followed up and found that the shore hinge had failed and decided the gangway needed to be removed before the river froze. So we were expecting some pretty significant temperature drops there in the next week. And so we decided to go ahead and get that removed on January 3rd. We removed the gangway and placed it on the Schweibert landing next to the band shelter. We had to remove all the fire suppression lines and electrical lines. For those of you that don't know, this gangway structure is about 7 feet wide and 80 feet long and weighs about 11,000 pounds. So it's a pretty significant structure. It took a crane and some heavy equipment. I have some pictures. How did this happen? We're not real sure. Overnight between December 30th and the 31st, we had 30 miles per hour winds with gusts up to 50 miles an hour. The winds were reported from the west, and when we have the west winds like that, it creates the most wave action for that dock structure. So we've never had any issues with that gangways previously. Thank you. So with that, the damage on the western end of the hinge supports this as it was bent out of the wall. So you can see, will this work for a PDF, Tim?
Yeah, just back and forth.
There we go. It's delayed. The laser pointer. Sorry.
All right.
Well, the top picture there, you can see where the gangway attached to the abutment. That was severely damaged, and what's caused the failure for the gangway to fall into the river. The abutment was damaged as well. You can see again, we're looking at the top picture. The fire suppression lines, the electrical lines that go out there were all ripped down below and damaged, and would all need replaced. And then the third picture on the bottom is the gangway that was removed out of the water with the crane. So the second incident that happened was on January 13th. We again received a report that the section of the Schweibert dock was floating downstream. We immediately called Superior Seawalls to come in on an emergency basis to tie off that damaged portion of the dock. On January 14th, due to the amount of damage to the outer dock and support spuds, it was determined that the dock would need to be removed. Any type of temporary securement would not hold up through the winter due to the condition of the dock. And when we look back, we have some security cameras in Schweibert dock, or at Schweibert landing there, and we look back at the footage from PD, and reviewing that footage, the dock was in view, placed at the time of damage on January 12th, and at 2:34 the dock was undamaged. At 2:42 on that same day, the damage had occurred. There was no video available between those times, so we're obviously leaning towards ice. We had some reports from the Corps of Engineers that they were sending some ice through that had built up. They've been working on a project there, but again, we still can't point to that. The camera kicks on with motion, and the motion that caused that was a person at the Schweibert landing. So again, we don't know what caused that issue to happen. These are some additional pictures. This outer dock portion is 190 feet long and 12 feet wide, and it's secured by 4 spuds. You can see the spuds were bent about a 20-degree angle there. And actually, the dock on that bottom right picture, the dock actually sits on the other side of those spuds. So they were pushed over, and then the dock went over top. So it was pretty significant damage caused by, again, we think it's ice. Could it have been a barge? We don't think so, because that should have registered on our video camera or security cameras with that big of a structure. And it would have been there for at least a few minutes, passing by or coming loose and hitting it. So we certainly don't think that happened. And you can see in here there was some ice in that area. So the expenses that we've incurred to date are about $32,000. This involved removing the gangway, the support structures. We removed the destroyed sections of the dock as well from the river. And that's kind of where we are as of today. Just some background on the funding for the original dock project. The Schweibert dock was paid for with funds from the City of Rock Island and a $1.5 million grant from the IDNR and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. The City of Rock Island is required to maintain the dock to the design specifications for 20 years as part of the agreement with the grant funding. So it has a 20 years of useful life is what was agreed to.
Mike, can I interject here a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a couple questions. I don't want to get too far in and forget my train of thought.
Okay.
Can we go back to the support spuds and the outer dock damage? Do you find it, I just think it's kind of strange that we have that much damage. There's 3 support spuds,
There's
correct?
4.
4?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So were all 4 of those damaged?
Yes, they were.
Or would you find it kind of weird that ice itself would damage all 4 of those? That would seem kind of
It'd take a huge piece of ice
to damage all 4.
Yeah, I mean, we've checked around, we've done whatever reviewing we can. We just cannot find the culprit as to what has caused this. When we look back at the support structures, the original plans had those support spuds to be anchored in the river bottom with a grout type system. However, I think that through an addendum that was reduced and just for cost savings and put into refusal into the dirt or mud. So, over time of the 6 years that we've had that, has that loosened up enough with enough wave action and rocking back and forth to make those loose? We never saw that before when we inspected it. But again, I really don't feel that ice could have caused that much damage to that structure.
You think it was something other than ice?
I would think so.
Great. Okay.
But generally speaking, barges aren't running through there in first part of January or end of December.
As a follow-up question, who did the work on these and putting those spuds in, and who?
I believe the main contractor was Valley Construction, I believe.
Okay. Is there any kind of is there any? I guess what experience does Valley, I guess, have when it comes to marine dock work? And I guess my second question would be: is there any kind of a guarantee on the work, or is there any kind of a, barring? Again, I'm having a hard time believing that ice caused damage to all 4, same as you.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess what was the qualifications of Valley to do the dock work as far as that kind of work?
Without personally digging into the construction documents and seeing how the project went, I would assume Valley Construction had a subcontractor do all their the anchoring of the spuds and the support structure itself. Valley probably would have been the prime, but had a lot of subs doing some of this main work that they normally don't do. So I would assume that they had professionals doing the work.
And is there any kind of a guarantee on the work that was performed by them?
Generally, with these type of projects, it's a 1-year maintenance bond project, guaranteed type of work. I guess I can go back and again look at the project documents.
You're saying we should have bought the extended warranty on this one.
Well, I don't think that comes with an extended warranty, but generally speaking, it's a 1-year.
Okay.
If I remember right, there's also some quote nuts and bolts that were replaced. Well, I don't know if it was a year or so after they were defective. It was the manufacturer, they were defective.
Yeah, that's what I understand too. The outer dock section, immediately when it was built, had to be reinforced and made wider due to damages caused early on in the project, or as soon as it was completed.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right.
This is Alderman Sforgettis. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I was wanting to know when that 20-year time span started and when does it end?
The 20-year time spans it started in 2014. The project is done in 2034 as far as the timeline for 20 years.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
Mike, one more question, sorry, before we get on to your next page here. So as I'm reading through this, it talks about that the city has to maintain the dock to design specifications for 20 years. Now, does that mean that does it need to retain the original design? Is that the agreement? So like if we were to repair it, it has to go back to the original specifications as it pertains to the grant?
Yeah, the original agreement was to maintain the structure as it was installed for 20 years. Now, as I'll go in here in a little bit, but that can be modified, but there's a process for it.
All right, thank you.
This is Alderman Swanson. So I guess my question is, since we're not quite sure what caused the issue, would that preclude us from going back to the original design if there was a flaw with the original design that caused those to fail?
Yeah, and it's to be able to modify, I think what your question is, since we don't know what happened, to be able to modify that and go a different path from what we originally had. It doesn't really specify whether damage is known or unknown. It's just getting approval for that damage through the IDNR for that modification or forgiveness / relief of that structure. So these are some continued timelines that we had during this project. On March 11th, we contacted the grant administrator of the IDNR. IDNR was going to contact U.S. Fish and Wildlife and set up a meeting to discuss the damage that occurred and options for repairs, including any grant funding that is available. On March 7th, a conference call meeting took place with IDNR, Fish and Wildlife, Public Works, and the Parks Department. We explained that the damages that occurred, inquired about the funding possibilities and the next steps to get approval to modify the footprint of the dock by not replacing that outer dock portion. The request not to replace the outer dock portion is being requested due to the anticipated and unknown costs associated with the replacement of the outer dock. In addition to the costs, this section of dock is underutilized and experiences major wave action that is very dangerous while standing on the dock due to the amount of distance from the land and the fast river current. If you've never been out there, I have been out there only a few times. It is quite scary when you have big waves out there on that outer section. That section is about 250 feet out in the water from land side, and it's 60 feet farther than the next closest section of dock out into the river channel. So it is quite a feeling of being far away from the bank and feeling everything that the river puts to that dock. So during this meeting, the IDNR informed us that we could apply for grant funding for any of the repairs using the 2021 Big P grant application process, and that's a grant funded. It's 25% fund match for the city, and the award ranges between $30,000 and $200,000 with an average of $165,000 per award. So with that discussion, we looked into going through the mitigation process and doing a formal request to IDNR and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, which was done on July 8th. We submitted the IDNR and U.S. Fish and Wildlife regarding the modifications and repairs. We were asking for forgiveness of 18.7% of the prorated grant obligation due to the damage and the economic circumstances, which would make it a hardship for the city to repair that dock and all the associated cost with the repairs. That process is supposed to take a few months before they get back to us, letting us know if they will forgive that portion or not. In the meantime, we are moving forward with applying for the grant that is due in September to hopefully receive as much as $200,000 to make what repairs we have, because we do have more than $200,000 in repairs. So, and just for everyone's understanding, so forgiveness, I call it forgiveness relief, is basically asking for forgiveness of the grant obligations due to the catastrophic damage. The relief is requested under the Federal Register of Rules and Regs. So that's the process that we were going through. So this is the staff recommended. Parks and Public Works sat down, as we said in previous meetings, and came up with this little sketch here of the proposed repairs that we would like to see happen. And this is obviously we've talked about the outer dock shown in number 2 there. That would be removed. The gangway, which is number 1, would be replaced with a new supporting structure. And I highlighted the attachment, how it attached to the abutment in a few pictures ago. We would change that whole type of structure and put a wheel or a moving hinge that would allow a lot more flexibility. This was recommended by us by the manufacturer that we've been talking to when we were going through this process. So, but basically the outer dock section would be removed. Number 4 and 5, the fire suppression and the life ring would just come in closer. The tough boom barrier system would be pulled back, and you would be left with that footprint basically in gray. Would be the new structure. So what does that mean for boat use going forward without the outer dock section? Basically, you go from 23 slips down to 16 slips, so you're losing about 7 slips there. Which is about a 26% reduction of the boat mooring length. So staff doesn't feel that would be a huge impact to the use there. Obviously looking at the cost versus the benefit, that would be our recommendation going forward here. We put together some rough repairs based off of the work that was done in 2014. And again, I want to highlight these are estimated costs. All the costs are estimated, and without knowing exactly what's going to be required to be repaired in the scope of repairs, it's hard to determine the estimated cost. But we do estimate that the gangway repairs will be approximately $65,000 just to put that gangway back up and be able to use the dock, the remaining dock section. That does not include the cost of the spud support removal on the outer dock. If we were to just do the gangway repair and not do the outer dock, we would still need to remove the spuds that are out in the water that supported the outer dock section. And we don't have a cost on that currently, but it could be $30,000 to remove those. Again, we don't know what would be required to remove those structures. If we can just pull them out, pluck them out, if they will pull out, if they can't pull out, can we cut them off flush? Again, that's all up to the permitting process and what's allowed. But again, staff's recommendation is not to replace that outer dock. So on the outer dock, several of the outer dock cost estimates are unknown as well, due to not knowing what will be required for the engineering and permitting. The biggest unknown is associated with the support spud removal, replacement, and engineering costs. In 2012, this same work required muscle surveys and relocation was required, and at this time, we do not know if this would be required for just a replacement of the outer dock portion. So we estimate that outer dock portion to be replaced at about $175,000. We did get an estimate from Superior Seawall to move back in the existing structure that was damaged. It can be repaired, but to repair that structure alone is about $40,000. It suffered some severe damage in the middle of the structure. And then you have the cost of relocating that back in as well. It took them 3 days to get the outer dock out of there. It's each one of the walking structure on top of that is an individual paper block, so you have to remove all those, palletize them. It took 2 semis to get the outer dock delivered and stored. It's 190 feet long. It's just a huge structure. So I know there was a question, or at least asked, about the dock. If we were to just say, you know what, we don't want to fool with this at all, and I'm not saying that's what anybody wants to do. But if we wanted to go back to the IDNR and say, look, we've had issues with this dock. It's an underutilized dock most of the time. What are the chances of us just saying we're going to wash our hands of this, remove the dock, and have no dock there? And we did ask that question back in May, and basically what they've told us was that they've only seen that happen one time in the state of Illinois, and it was due to a catastrophic failure of a structure, and they forgave the entire amount of the grant. But they said that was only one time, and they've seen several requests come through. These happen every year, and they said they would not plan on that, especially with the amount of damage that we had with just the outer. Well, the 2 incidents, but ours wasn't a catastrophic failure to where we would need to remove that. But if we were to consider that, we would be looking at 14 years remaining on the grant, which is about 70% of the grant term. And we would have to refund about 70% of the $1.5 million. So we're looking at a little bit over $1 million to get out of that issue. And then we would need to have the cost, the amount of money to remove the entire structure as well. So that's not a good option.
Mike, what is the time? Is there like a time frame that's specified with this grant? I know we got the 20 years of maintenance, but is there a certain amount of time that they say that we have to have those repairs done in? Is there a time frame?
The repairs that we're applying for the modifications?
Correct.
Well, no, they did not give us a time frame. The money would not become available, or at least the awards would not be known until April of next year.
Nope, I understand that part. My question being, again, we signed an agreement, or there were stipulations that were tied into this grant originally for maintaining the dock. So should there be damage, was there something outlined in that said we have to have these repairs done in X amount of time or X amount of months? Or
I don't
like that?
know that right tonight, but I can find that out for you.
Okay. Thank you.
Are you done?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't. That's fine. I wanted to give you a chance for presentation. Was there some other question? Oh, I guess that my concern or thoughts is come from this from more than one angle, so everybody knows I'm a boater, but it's one of these things I think that you take for granted what you have, and when it's gone, you miss it. It's amazing how many boaters I've talked to, and even, believe it or not, restaurant people downtown that says, when's that going to get fixed? People want to come down and use it, and that's going to go, well, why didn't you use it before? Well, I didn't have time, or whatever it is. But so I guess that's more of a statement that I think there's hopefully going to be more people using it when it is repaired and back together. My second statement or thoughts is that why can't we get this? We know we're going to have, number one, it's not feasible to take it all out. You just talked about that. We know the gangplank's going to have to be put back either way. Mm-hmm. So why can't we do the gangplank, take those studs out? They've got to come out. You can't fix those spuds the way they are. Correct. They're going to have to come out because they're bent, and the tension of the tensile of the steel won't be good enough just to bend them back. So remove the spuds. We got kind of do the known facts. Mm-hmm. That money's got to be spent whether we get the grant or don't get the grant. That money's going to have to be spent. And so why not put the gangplank in, pull those spuds out so we have something usable, get it back to a usable state, and then if we get the grant, we get reimbursed for what we did do, and then whether we got permission to eliminate the outside dock or not.
Yeah, and that's the direction we're moving towards. Again, it comes down to funding. Randy and I had talked about TIF funding possibilities to do this repair. There's no money budgeted for this type of repair.
Right.
Which is why we're going with the grant process.
Right.
And again, the permitting process and approval process does not happen that quickly.
Right. And the issue is the grant money, if we wait till late next April, too late for the TIF funding, because it has to be spent before that. And we got to spend this money, whether we get the grant or not, we got to spend money.
Does the TIF funding have to be spent by April of next year?
We already have it allocated.
Okay.
By then.
And so it's kind of too late unless we allocate it ahead of time, but and still wait. And it's got to be spent either way. It's got to be spent, no matter what, unless you leave this island out there. But then we're not maintaining it the way it was supposed to be, so we're in violation of the grant.
You know, we'd have to find out if we'd be reimbursed. We may not be reimbursed for money spent up front since it's already done. That's what we'd have to find out.
Yeah.
That would be a question.
And once again, ask for that forgiveness type of a deal also, because, and I guess, once again, selfish feeding to a certain degree, but talking to boaters, and to have it done this year so it's usable this year.
Yeah, there's two items here, what we can do and what we'll, if we get any funding. And again, we're not aware of those yet. We're hopeful to know by September whether we can do the outer dock or make that modification. And then anything, once we get back all the information, that would be rolled into our 2021 budget.
Right. And whatever, but I'm just saying, is, I guess, without repeating, is if we can get reimbursed, let's spend the money and do it, because it's got to happen sooner or later, whether it's in 2020 or 2021.
Are you saying to do the outer dock as well?
No.
The whole scope?
No. I say hold off on the outer dock. Once again, if you pull those spuds, which they've got to be done anyway, and you put then it's allowable. There's no threat to boaters to be able to get in there if those are gone. And you put the ramp in. Go ahead and move your ring buoy and your other cable. Go ahead and move all of that, just like it's not going to be replaced. That's got to be done no matter what.
Yep, and that's the way we'll move forward as soon as we know
And so
we can do
if
that.
if we can get reimbursed, why not do it now and use it and have it out there? Also, it looks silly the way it is. It makes us look like we can't maintain our stuff. Someone could get, actually, with those spuds out there, could have another issue. And then worry about that outside one if and when we get granting. If we get forgiveness to be able to take care of it or eliminate it, or if we get the grant. Another little tidbit is that when you're counting slips, you cannot count the outside of that outer slips.
Right.
Because there was no cleats out there. You couldn't tie up to the outer side. It was only the inside. Could be used for slips. But, which is, to me, was a crying sheep too. That does play a role. That outer one does play, for boaters, does play a role. It does help break the waves. So if you have a boat inside, it's not an official where they have curtains and everything else to break waves, but it does help smooth the waters inside for the smaller boats inside.
Yeah, and we understand that. It's just going to the fact that how dangerous it is standing out there during those times where the waves are high. The damage that we've experienced with that previously already, shortly into this agreement on the 20 years.
Yeah. I think most people, like I say, that's called compromise. That goes away. But let's get their other stuff usable. And a lot of cities in the river towns have docks. I think it's a great amenity. They may not get used real heavily, but it is a good amenity to have. We have, we have parks that don't get used real heavily either.
So we can come back to council with that cost, and council can decide on where they want to spend the money, because it isn't just replacing the gangway. There's a host of other things that would be done too, besides the outer dock. We're changing the attachment points, and we're doing a number of other things. So we need a cost on the whole thing. Council needs to present it with a cost and decide if you want to spend that money, and staff will make some recommendations on how to get that money.
And if we don't, once again, that's fine. I think that's fine. But if for some reason the council, we have to spend it. I don't think it's really a council. I mean, it's a council decision because of the dollars. But if you don't spend it, you're in violation of your grant.
Well, but we're working.
And so what choice do you have?
That's why we have to work. We don't have all that information. We're saying we can't right now today say we're going to do that because we don't know if we're going to be reimbursed or if this would be money lost and then we get a grant and we're not reimbursed. And council needs that money to be able to make a decision to spend, potentially more than $50,000 on this.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So we have to be able to give that. If that's a direction from council, we'll do that. But we need to come back with an actual cost. And, it's not like next week we can put the gangway back in. If it's that simple, we'd have the gangway in already.
No, I understand it.
Yeah, there's a temporary gangway structure there would be
No.
very expensive and difficult.
I'm not promoting that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
No,
promoting
we'd have to get that information, the staff can get that information and come back with a dollar amount on whether we'd be reimbursed or not. And if we won't be reimbursed for work already done, then council would have to make a decision, and if they want to just eat that cost. So but council
That's
has
the biggest question, whether we can be reimbursed or not.
Council has to have that information in order to make this decision. Staff on themselves can't make a decision to spend that kind of money.
Yeah, whether we'll be reimbursed or whether we'll be allowed to not replace the outer dock or we be required to do that. And as soon as we know that, we'll come back with those options and cost.
I hope that we can come back, in relatively quick order on what the cost would be.
Well, and a timeline of how long it would take. I don't know if that's something that can be done in 3 weeks. It may be even if we started now, it would be the end of the boating season before we could get those repairs done. I don't know, but we have to get that information so we can present it to you.
Okay.
And so that sounds like it's the direction, and so we'll provide that information for you.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
And that's frustrating.
This is Alderman Sforgettis. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I just wanted to express a couple of concerns. I think gathering the information you're going to gather as far as costs and especially grant information is good. I'm concerned that we don't know the actual cause of the incidents that took place and what will happen if they reoccur next winter or the winter after that. I'm not expecting an answer. I'm just expressing a concern. And the other thing that was mentioned that I had a question about was if we were to use TIF money, downtown TIF money, I assume, to make the repairs, then would that money need to be replaced by the city into the TIF at some point?
No, we would just use that money, but we would use that instead of funding something else within the TIF. And given the projects that are sort of hanging out there, we're not prepared to come forward and tell the council that, however much money is available for this in the TIF and what a recommendation would be.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions by any other council members? Thank you. All right. Beth, are you ready?
Good evening, Council. My name is Beth Payne, and I'm here representing the Development Association of Rock Island. Here to talk about an open discussion about the potential of a short-term 90-day lease between Dari and the city relative to a term of privatizing the Great River Plaza. Before I kind of get into that, I just want to thank you as the council members and city staff. We entered into a brand new 3-year agreement with the city in March, and I really feel like over the last 6 months it's been a tremendous asset to this community between our partnership and signing the agreement and immediately going into our COVID response, helping nearly 70 businesses with grants, and I know that more are coming. Anywhere between that and the business survey, being a little bit more involved, hiring new staff. And speaking of new staff, I wanted to take a moment to introduce you to Stacy McIntosh, who is our program manager, who's here with me today to support. She's smiling through her mask, by the way. Some exciting new possibilities coming on the forefront. We'll be hiring a VP of Development Services who starts next Monday. So I'm excited to announce that publicly with you. So with that, really with our COVID response, together with the city, we've had open communication about a lot of activity. and a lot of possibilities and new opportunities that can be presented that I'd like to talk to you today. And just like I said, like in a very open discussion about ways that Dari has kind of proposed a solution to some of the concerns that we've had given the pandemic and lack of social distancing and large crowds in our public spaces in the Great River Plaza. So just to kind of give a brief history, as you see here on the map, between Dari and the city, privatizing the plaza is not a new idea. It's been something that's been along well before I actually became employed here. I'm celebrating my 10th anniversary in November. So my experience is that we've taken not only city staff, but Dari, multiple stakeholders, business owners, to various areas throughout the country to kind of get some ideas to kind of bring back here for some consideration here locally. There was a trip that was done specifically to Memphis, Tennessee, to see Beale Street, to kind of take their model and see how we could incorporate that here locally, as well as when I was actually here in 2011, we went down to West Palm Beach, Florida, because they had a lot of similar characteristics of our downtown, and they had privatized this section. So we spent, yes, Clematis Street, yep. Oh, yeah, perfect. So we met with Willie Perez and Rafael Clemente and the mayor and various stakeholders, and we took about probably a group of 10 people from Rock Island down to West Palm Beach to kind of take a look at how they're kind of incorporating privatizing a certain area within their downtown district. So from there, we actually brought those representatives back to Rock Island so they could actually see what the district looked like in our footprint. And so we brought Rafael Clemente, who is the executive director of their downtown association, as well as Willie Perez, their privatized security. The difference with them is that they have budgets that are much bigger than ours. I recall West Palm Beach's budget just for the downtown area was over $3.5 million, and the privatized sector actually had an almost $12 million budget. But what we did see that we really thought we kind of put that together here was some possibilities that they came back and presented in a report back to our stakeholders after they came, and I believe it was from like a You Make It My Weekend festival event. At that time, the district was kind of, again, struggling with the idea of how to manage these crowds when we have a privatized event and then when it goes into a public space. But now, as we kind of move into our COVID era, I don't like to call it the new normal, it's our COVID era, there's some ideas here that we kind of thought we proposed to the council for a potential solution in a short-term, 90-day, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, just to kind of test to see if privatizing the plaza now may be a good time to do so. So, in looking at this and kind of incorporating a lot of the ideas that kind of came through, we did have 2 meetings last week with downtown stakeholders that consisted of bar owners. We also had businesses like Miss Bermani's and Hickey Brothers, and we also had representation of our residential base with home-based property management staff that manages about 40 commercial spaces downtown, as well as over 300 residential units, whether they be owner-occupied or rental. So it's kind of just when you're thinking about this, just think about it's not just for the nighttime economy. It truly is for the entire economy of the downtown as we kind of move forward. So what we thought was just, again, a pilot program. We call it a pilot just to see if it's going to work out and, make tweaks along the way. So by no means are any of these ideas set in concrete. We did incorporate some ideas from the city staff as well as our police chief when we took a look at how we could really help benefit the whole as we move forward. So the proposed area, I brought this map today just to kind of show a visualization of where we're kind of thinking about, but between 19th Street and 17th Street along the 2nd Avenue corridor, and that also incorporates Arts Alley. And with that, a lot of components that we took from our West Palm Beach report is, outside of just the generality of the activity, is that we're looking to make an investment along the plaza area, incorporating some additional cafe lighting, some areas that may not have some well-lit areas. We're actually currently looking at possibilities that we can do as a property owner to help increase lighting and make sure that there are no dark areas that, we don't want any activity at night to maybe potentially happen. So Dari would be entering into a short-term meaning 90 days, to truly see how this could impact with the city of Rock Island. And every business and building owner that's along that area that I'm referencing would enter into essentially a sublease agreement with Dari. And at that time, then we would communicate with each one of these building owners and business owners to say this is kind of what we're proposing to do and how this could potentially be a benefit for you. One of those components that Dari would put into that sublease agreement is that anyone who has dram shop insurance, that they ask and add Dari as additionally as an insured. We did confirm that's not a direct cost to the person that owns the dram shop insurance. That was a concern that was brought up. If there is, depending on the insurance carrier, is very minimal, and we feel like we could either add requests that they ask for a waiver, or we could potentially cover that cost for them, because the goal is not to impact negatively any of the businesses. Any of those that are in that sublease agreement, if they have a cafe permit within the city that's already been approved, that would still remain in place. They would still demarcate their area per state law, liquor law. We have been working with the city, and I know the city manager and the mayor have been very graceful with our businesses so they can allow to expand their cafe area once that's been approved, so they can allow for social distancing and a larger amount of people. I do know that, with the 25% increase of allowing people inside the businesses help them right now. But one of the major issues that we found is with the public area, it's really hard to control mass amounts of people that are coming in to the tunes of hundreds. And we want to make sure that our first priority is public health. We want to make sure that we don't revert back to phases that we don't want to go back into. We want to make sure that when we're looking at the pandemic that we're currently in, that we want to make sure that people are upholding and maintaining all the state mandates to ensure that everyone is enjoying their time in our downtown safely, being either social distancing or wearing masks. And from that, we feel like the privatization component, we might be able to have a little bit better control as to the amounts of people that are coming in a relatively quick amount of time. And working with the police chief, which I welcome him to come up and say a few words if he likes, to really talk about how we can kind of help manage large amounts of crowds. Currently, if there's someone, say, gathering in groups of 10 or more in a large area in the public space, there's no way that we could do anything to kind of move them along or ensure that they are social distancing. The privatization component would make sure that we would have the authority to do so with that, and also grant the authority with any of the business owners that are within that footprint to do so as well. Dari is a small but mighty staff. Again, with our property management and the many hats that we wear, and between all of us, there's probably about 16 people. So we want to make sure that, the business owners that are within the footprint understand that they have a possibility and an opportunity to kind of take matters and handle it first and foremost as if it's their own property, if it's their own business establishment. So we feel like that will help to ensure that people aren't lingering in areas that don't need to be lingering and not really contributing to the nighttime, daytime economy within our downtown footprint. Our proposal isn't necessarily to put fencing up. It's more so like in the West Palm Beach model, they do have signage that's clearly marked, that's large, that people understand when they're walking into the privatized area, that they understand there's signage that's there, so they understand that this place is under management and control of the Development Association of Rock Island, and that, for instance, if there's anything that, like when they may cause a public nuisance, they understand and they are aware that they are into an area that they have the ability to be removed. Any of the event permits that people may have in the future when we are allowed to have large events again, if this so moves to be a longer term thing, that master agreement that for that event would supersede Dari's program. So it would be something that would be very fluid. It'd be very, it's always subject to change. I mean, that's one thing that we've learned, right? Like every day things change, every minute, every hour. So we want to make sure that this is an ever-changing effort as we kind of, again, attempt it. There's been a lot of discussions about it in the future, and we really think now it might be a time to just give it a try and see how well it works. With that, there was just some general confusion as like what people probably thought privatization was. So we kind of think like just using the term lease agreement for a certain amount of time might be better for people to kind of understand that this is a leased section that's being leased between the city and the Development Association of Rock Island. There's some wordage there that we could probably work out. I'm sorry, I'm kind of losing my space here. I think I'm trying to cover everything. In addition to that, I don't know if I also mentioned the footprint would encompass the Arts Alley as well, outside of just like what we know as the Great River Plaza. So when you're looking at the footprint, you can kind of see that that's where that's kind of managed right now. So with that, I guess I kind of open it up for any review or any comments or how you'd like to see.
Beth,
Yes.
how has this been received by the tenants, business owners down in the plaza area thus far? I mean, I know you've had meetings and.
The meetings, they weren't as best attended as I would hope them to be. I'll go ahead and be honest about that. But again, I think the more that we can communicate about the possibilities, and I think through the pilot program, we can definitely, continue to communicate this. I don't think it was ill-received. I think people were kind of confused as like, what exactly does this give me authority to do? I know like Ms. Bermani's, for instance, had a question as to whether or not, we as a business owner wouldn't have to manage an issue that might be outside, and that's not the case. Instead, we kind of empower that business to be like, if there's an issue that you see outside in a public space, you by all means have the authority to call the police and have that handled if that's something that you don't feel safe doing yourself. So I don't think there was any ill comments. I think people are excited. I think some people are looking forward to seeing if this is an opportunity. Outside of just this, if we were to continue moving forward, let's just say outside of the COVID era, and this is something that we continue to do, maybe it might just be on a revolving basis. Dari's looking into programming that space to be a little bit more of the central hub for excitement. I know that Alderman Swanson had talked recently about the arts initiatives and how we can kind of expand that through the city. And there's been a lot of things that we have, been provided as an opportunity that we could just kind of, make sure just as the leaseholder of that space, that we wouldn't have to worry about, going through the idea process. It would just kind of be an ongoing thing for additional programming to advance our artist-inspired live-work community that's in our downtown that we continue to grow. I also think it's a good opportunity for the residential base. Right now, like I said, we manage over 300 spaces residentially, and then also downtown 40 commercial spaces. So, when we're talking with our tenants downtown, a lot of them are always hoping for additional activity to be going on. And while we could rely on the business owners, we want to make sure to expand and enhance that partnership. This could definitely be something that DARI can kind of take on and program in the future through its, annual budgets.
Well, I personally appreciate the work that you're doing. I would like to ask one more question, although I'm personally in support of it. But how, during the COVID, we'll call it the COVID era, how do you plan on enforcement of these, we'll say, excessive groups? What is the enforcement plan? Who's taking the charge, or who's taking the lead in that?
Well, we've had multiple conversations between the chief and myself, as well as our organization. And really, when you look at the amount of investment that we have as a nonprofit within our downtown, we are very in tune with trying to find a solution as to helping this situation out. And Chief, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think a lot of the concerns that we have when there's a large group, we just don't have the authority to kind of move them along. And by having the privatization, this would definitely be where I could, reach out to the police and say there's a situation and we'd like to kind of disperse the group. And that would be our way of saying, because currently I don't think at this point they can really do that unless it's after 3 a.m. and all the bars are closed and there's, it's closed down. So that would really just be our opportunity to kind of, again, attempt that. And if that isn't as successful as we hope it to be, just kind of go back to the drawing table and really, again, like this is a fluid conversation. It's a kind of a fluid effort. DARI doesn't have the budget right now to pay for private security, nor do we think that's something that we should look at immediately, but that's definitely not off the table for the future either.
So you're anticipating if there were an issue that, and you would just rely on the businesses to self-initiate calls to the police department as opposed to having officers on duty down in the plaza area?
Right now, yes. Let's just say, for instance, there might be a staff within, let's just pretend like this, like the plaza is everyone's backyard, and there's a situation going on in your backyard, but you can't do anything about it because you kind of have that backyard, but you don't own that backyard.
Oh, I understand that, yes.
That's kind of what we're thinking. It's kind of.
We just didn't. I was just want to make sure I understood where. Is it more something where we're not going to have a big police presence there to monitor that, or is it just like an on-call thing, or people are just going to make these phone calls down to the police department every 10 minutes. Oh, I see more than X amount of people here. Are they going to get flooded with those kind of calls? Or
Yeah. I mean, our goal, again, with our communication with the business owners would be that we would like to empower them. Empowering them, being like, again, if you have something going on in a park in your backyard that you own, you kind of, as a property owner, you kind of try to manage it yourself.
Right.
And if things don't progressively move after you've tried to handle it yourself, that's when you call the police. I think that there are some situations right now where the police are being called for a lot of things that, again, the business owner has no control over because they don't own that property, but there's a circumstance that's happening outside their front door. So, again, a lot of it is just to really coach and really partner with our businesses. We already have great relationships with many of them, just to kind of, again, empower themselves to kind of take it on themselves, to kind of lessen the burden. I know that the police is, the chief is definitely in favor of our idea. And again, he's committed to making sure that we maintain a publicly safe downtown area, but this is another way that we can kind of alleviate that immediate burden from the chief and the police department as an opportunity perhaps to see how things go. Our goal is to have it be in that situation, but again, if it doesn't happen to be that way, again, this is where we have to be agile and, again, kind of adapt to whatever that situation may be that makes us kind of relook at the plan and kind of go from there.
Okay.
I think the chief's there. I don't know if he had a thought or two he wanted to express.
The chief is here.
I didn't know he stuck up behind you.
I didn't see him.
He's a small guy. You can't miss it.
Not according to my doctor. I think it's important to, everything has really been touched on, I think, very well. The police department is not going to just withdraw support from the district. We'll still maintain a presence. The goal, I think, in all this for us is to reduce some of the burden that is placed on the police department. Beth talked about empowering the business owners because not everything needs to be the first call to the police. I think if the business owners have the ability to address some of the perhaps more minor or nuisance issues, it alleviates some demand that's placed upon us. And, of course, if they're not comfortable or they don't feel that they can handle the situation, the police are always going to be a phone call away. But I still envision that we're going to have to obviously be a part of the, especially the late night entertainment, that there will still be somewhat of a police presence. But my hope would be that we begin to minimize the number of problems early into the situation. So if something is developing, we can correct that problem early so we're not at 2 in the morning dealing with hundreds of people, unruly mobs in the plaza, that perhaps we can, with the authority to get people to move on if they're not contributing in some meaningful way, I guess, and looking at behavior that would give indications that perhaps there's going to be a problem so we can head it off.
I have a quick question for you, Chief,
Yep.
as well as a follow-up to that. So what are your recommendations for having some training sessions with those we'll call greeters, bouncers, people that are going to be kind of monitoring around their particular bar areas in the evening so that maybe they can handle, on a more, something that can to identify with or what they know to look for and at what point do they make that call to the police department and something to kind of guide them and how to react, because a lot of them don't go to specific training for those jobs. And I think, as long as, is there something that you're planning or the city's planning?
So we hadn't planned anything specifically. I think we can give very generalized direction. I don't think we want to get bogged down into specific training because then we begin to absorb some additional liability for the police department and police officers' level of authority versus a private citizen is certainly different. So not saying that we can't provide some components of training on different aspects, but I wouldn't want to get too far down the weeds about if this happens and you do this, or if they're throwing a punch, you take them to the ground type thing. I don't want to get in that direction. I think that's more dependent upon the business owner to find ways to train his people appropriately to deal with the issues they do. And we can also provide some component about when is it appropriate to call the police, what can you expect if we're responding, what type of violations can lead to more disruptive behavior or something along that lines.
That was what I was looking for. Thank you.
Yep.
I have some comments.
Yes.
I want to make sure that we give our colleagues on the phone the opportunity to talk. Swanson or Spaghettis, either one of you want to input, say anything?
This is Alderwoman Swanson. I'm in favor of it. I think it's a great idea. We have issues down there, and I think that this might be one way to kind of help curtail some of the problems that we've had by empowering the business owners to be able to police their patrons and their businesses in a more meaningful manner than they've been able to do now.
Sounds like a plan.
Poulos is also in remote.
Paulus, are you remotely?
Yes, I am remotely.
I didn't know
Thanks
that,
to
sorry.
the
Sorry about that.
I am excited to see this, and I look forward to a positive result there. And again, it's something that, as fluid as things are, it's something that I think that the chief will keep an eye on and make adjustments as necessary in partnership with the downtown businesses.
All right, well, sorry to be the Debbie Downer of the group, but I would like to, poke some questions or some ideas about this idea. I'm going to take off my mask because it's hard to talk in it. Sorry. So I think that the general idea and what we're trying to accomplish with this is good, right? We know that we've had a number of issues with chronic nuisances and crowds, especially in the era of COVID, as you so delicately put it. At 1 o'clock in the morning, nobody's socially distancing down there, right? So that's clearly a problem. On city council, we are often presented with different policy ideas, and they are good, they are well-intentioned, they also have negative side effects. And you got to do your best in weighing if the goods outweigh the bads, or if you can get to the same ends by a different means. And I'm increasingly wondering whether we could accomplish the same ends of this idea through alternative means. I think that the potential for problems from privatizing this amount of public space could be problematic. I know in our meetings we discuss things like how to make sure that people have the ability to appeal being trespassed, right? We have people who live, not only the businesses, but we have people who live on that area. And what happens if somebody who lives there is out one night and they make a small mistake and are trespassed for it, and now they can't get back to their home? That seems like a pretty big problem. So an appeal process or something like that, I think by just giving any business owner, and no offense to our business community, I don't mean to suggest anything, but by giving anybody the ability to make the call of you're welcome here or you're not welcome here, leaves it wide open for the potential of making some bad calls. And so there's a concern of civil liberties, or however you want to put it there, that I have. I think that we have, Beth, you were hitting on a number of things that I would say we could pursue that do not have these sort of negative side effects of what I'm talking about, but could still get us to the same end. Increased lighting, activating the space. I know at the meetings we talked about food trucks and things like that. Every year the City Council does our annual goal-setting session, and this past year we haven't been able to get a lot of it done, understandably so. But a lot of the things that we included in last year's goal-setting session had to do with this sort of idea. How do we activate the downtown? How do we make it sustainable? You talked about the budgets of West Palm Beach and the significantly higher budgets that they have to activate the space and to make sure it's secure and safe. Much different from the reality here in Rock Island. But there's a number of items on our council goals that address how could we potentially create a more sustainable revenue stream to do this type of thing. And so I guess my position is we could just be doing what we've already laid out in our goals of looking into an SSA or a business improvement district or lighting. I mean, last year, I think it was last year now, we had the whole discussion about, okay, we're going to address downtown infrastructure, everything from the grates around the trees to the sidewalks to the curbs, and there was unfortunately very little process made on that because of other things going on. But we already know how we can improve this, right? We know that increased lighting, activating the space, making it someplace where something's going on as opposed to where you go because nothing's going on. That could potentially get us to the very ends that we're wanting here without the potential concerns that I have. So I guess I'm sorry that I'm sort of a little bit more concerned about this idea than everyone else, but I would encourage us to, instead of going down this road and finding, oh, okay, well, how are we going to do an appeal process, and what if we get sued, and just this whole tangled web of what could result of this, why bother even starting it, and instead just address the things that we know we should be doing anyway. Thank you. I do appreciate everything that you are doing, and like I said, you had plenty of spot-on ideas that we should be doing. I think that those would take more of a priority, in my opinion, than this specific idea.
Let me, I guess, talk about that, some of those a little bit, and a little bit of a rebuttal, but yet adding some things. We talk about a lot of things at night and night programming. There's a lot of things during the day that this changes also.
Right.
And so there's positives on that side of it. So it's not just the lighting, but it's the usage of that space during the day. It is who uses it during the day, type deal. Once again, sometimes there's individuals or groups that we maybe need to move along during the day, and this allows us to be able to do that. There's no doubt there's, I'll call it devils in the detail to be worked out, and this was just the beginning part of it. There is, I hate to say, months yet of really working the details out of the trespassing deal. I think the chief brought that up, and that's a very valid issue. How to deal with, you call essential businesses, the grocery store that's there and everything else, and access to those things, all have to be addressed in some type of document on how we're going to do it. But even when or if we come up with that document, as Beth mentioned earlier, it's something that's going to have to be fluid, because it's kind of like you're running into something, didn't think about that one, and we need to address it. And so I think that if we all go into it with that type of mind thought, they can be overcome. If we wish to have, if there's a will, there is a way, as they say. Another, I think, key component to this is it brings in private dollars. Once again, we talk about the dollars that the city gives to DARI in the partnership here with employees and that sort of thing. There is a substantial amount of money that is private dollars being invested into DARI. And if we don't do this, we could be excluding ourselves from access to those funds. Or at least very simplistic. And so I think that could be a negative if we don't do something like this. And being a 90-day trial, and we find, or whatever it is that I think we find maybe go down that road instead of saying maybe it's not for us, but maybe we find it is. There's been other cities that have found it very successful. Once again, you can go to Kansas City. There's just a number of places. It's I hate to say endless, but there's a long list of people that have found it to be very successful. And it also allows them to be more, I hate to use the word controlling, is the wrong word, but for other things that go on down, programming to go on down there, it puts it into an organization that is maybe better fixed to do that sort of thing than we are as a city. It's really not a role of the city to do that. So,
or even more empowered to do so.
Empowered to do so. That's correct. And along with, then you get more collaboration of the people that have an investment down there, being the bar owners or the building owners, to help with that collaboration of, and not just the big events, but just a programming, because it could be anything. It could be symphony. Who knows what it is, but you have more of a collaborative self-needing. They have a skin in the game, so to speak, that could be an advantage for them to have control over this space.
In the report that the West Palm Beach group did for you all that was presented, some of the concerns that Alderman Parker raised, did they address any of those? And
They were addressing it from a perspective of like a festival, large event. A lot of those things have been addressed and don't necessarily, I would say, remain completely relevant to this day, although there are many components that still do. We would definitely want to have the support of Alderman Parker, though, considering this is his ward. So, as we, continue moving forward, if there's addressing items that in the plan currently right now that isn't being supported by the alderman that is located in, Dari would be hesitant to kind of move forward with that because we'd want to have that 100% support.
Yeah.
So, this is just, again, a fluid conversation that needs to continue. As we hire our staff, and Stacy, of course, is going to be more actively involved with our businesses. And, through the forward application, I'm sure that as we continue to move that along, that there's going to be more interaction between the businesses. But, the West Palm Beach report was specifically to kind of like address a lot of the nightlife security issues that we were kind of running into as an entity that was hosting these events.
Okay. Right.
And kind of, again, advancing that initial thought of the Beale Street model and how we could incorporate that. So,
Right.
I'm sorry. I want to make sure that those will virtually get a chance.
Yeah, I just real quick following up on the West Palm Beach report. I've read that many times, and ask Randy Tweet how many times I've brought up the mapping out idea that was presented in that report. If we have concerns of habitual chronic nuisances, individuals who are drinking or urinating or being a nuisance in the downtown, there is a mechanism, or at least I've asked that we look into the mechanism that was suggested in that report to see if we could map out these types of individuals, which, in my opinion, is far better than just a carte blanche privatization, because it's because of the behavior, right? You get mapped out of an area because you chronically break the rules. Versus with the privatization idea, there is the potential to make people move along, as it's been put, to before, it has been demonstrated that their behavior is problematic. So that is another example of where I think we have alternatives to this idea that could get us to the same ends via a different means. Thank you.
Is there anybody on the phone that wishes to, I'm sorry, Randy, if you.
No, go ahead.
Anybody on the phone that wishes to say, ask questions or their thoughts? Alderman Spaghettis, Swanson, Poulos? They still there?
Yes, we're still here. And some good points. This is Alderman Poulos. There's some good points being put out on both sides. I would like to see us give this a shot, give it a chance before we say it's not doable.
And this is Alderwoman Swanson. I echo Alderman Poulos' comments. I think that, Dari is asking for a 90-day lease, a trial. I think we don't really have much to lose if we go ahead and try it for 90 days. If it works, that's great. If it doesn't work, then we can go back to some of the other ideas that we came up with during our study session. But I kind of think that, this may be a good thing, and for a trial period, it might be worth trying.
do you have something, Randy?
Okay.
So the intent here is not to move someone along because a business owner doesn't like the color of their trousers. It would be based on behavior, but it allows that to happen without having to call an officer on a low priority issue who maybe gets down there and then the situation has resolved itself. And the trespassing essentially is the mapping out of these chronic abuses. I don't expect there's going to be hundreds of people trespassed. I think if there are people trespassed, it is those few individuals that cause a chronic problem. But this, again, as we've said a number of times and Beth has said, it empowers the business owners to be able to help monitor some of this behavior and not having to wait for an officer who oftentimes may have better things to do than try to deal with someone who's harassing customers or drinking out of a paper bag or that type of behavior that we do want to eliminate. But it isn't meant to, I don't like the look of that person, they can't be here. That's not the intent, and if a business owner were to do that, we'd deal with that. If someone had an issue and they lived downtown, we'd figure out how to make that work. I mean, these are unique situations I see that I wouldn't say the whole program, we can't consider it because a person living downtown might run into a problem. So again, the intent is to control behavior and not to target individuals, and because we don't like someone doesn't like the way they look or the way they dress. That's not the intention at all.
Well put.
And I wouldn't expect that business owners would try to do that. It just doesn't seem.
Could affect their.
It doesn't seem logical.
Right. I mean, obviously that's the intent, but the entire country is having a discussion on implicit bias and things that we're not even entirely conscious of doing. So I think that this has some danger of being an environment that could certainly have that happen regardless of our intent.
It does, and Dari would certainly work to control that, and the city would work to control that to ensure that doesn't happen, and if it does, it's dealt with.
How long would the trespass be in effect? And then what is the appeal process again?
There isn't.
That's the problem.
So that was one of the discussion points that we had. Currently, when we issue a trespass notice, it doesn't expire. My thought process and some of the general discussion was that, is there a graduated program? Is it a 90-day suspension or trespass, or is it 180 days or something, or is it a lifetime ban? And I also think that probably something along this magnitude needs to have some sort of review process attached to it. So if somebody wants to appeal a suspension, there's a mechanism in place that it's whom it's reviewed by or whom is the final authority. I can't say. That's just some of my at least initial thoughts on it.
Thank you. I personally think there needs, we'd like to know what that review process consists of, and I like the idea of a graduated thing if there was, but thank you for clarifying.
This would come before City Council again.
Oh, certainly.
At least once, if not multiple times. Obviously, I'll call it a draft, a contract type deal, and people's inputs and that sort of thing before it's voted on or even continue to go forward. Looking for suggestions. So that's why I'm saying before it's kind of like, let's just do it. We kind of give the approval, and next council meeting we're talking about it. It's not going to happen that fast because there are a number of, as we've got on the phones and everything else, it's kind of, didn't think about that. We need to work on this and get legal on that. And so it'll take a little refining and everything else to go. And unfortunately, it could be close to the time we do it, the outdoor season becomes closer to an end. Who knows if it takes that long? And so we don't want it to be the 90-day trials throughout the winter, because that may not be a fair trial.
Right, and I suppose that's more or less my point, right? I mean, every hour that our staff spend on figuring out the bureaucratic and legal thing that we're discussing here tonight is an hour that we're not spending calling up food trucks and getting them scheduled into the downtown, putting up a budget for how we're going to string lights and address the infrastructure needs for the downtown. I guess my point here is that I would like to see more of our staff time dedicated to these things, which we've already prioritized in our goal setting session, than figuring out how to make this idea work. That's
So staff is already putting together the budget you speak of. They've been working on that for several weeks now to get a detailed budget together, depending on how much money is available out of the TIF. So that work is ongoing anyway. And much of this work would be done by Dari, and they're willing to take up a lot of that work. So it isn't, we're in a partnership with Dari now, and as our partners, they would absorb some of this work. It wouldn't all come to city staff.
Right.
And we do have a review process is easy for us to set up. So we have a review or appeal process for everything now. A water bill, a parking ticket, a nuisance complaint. So there's a review process for everything. So that's relatively easy to set that up, and that would be presented to council as part of this as it came forward. So that would be something that we would make sure we address.
Yeah.
Interesting. And there hasn't been one business at this point come across and saying, I do not want it. There's been some that's kind of like, I'm nervous, I'm hesitant, as you heard, but yet open to the next steps and everything else. So unlike some other things we've done where there's a definite they don't want, this is one that either they do want it or want to try it, or are willing to go down and experiment with it.
But Dari's position is to make sure that we have the alderman's support.
Yes.
Let's keep talking.
Is there any? Go ahead.
We do need to come forward with some kind of discussion on food trucks also, because certainly people often say to me, we need food trucks downtown. Well, what happens when you park that food truck next to an existing brick and mortar restaurant? How do we deal with that? So other municipalities have already dealt with that, and we don't have a current policy on that. We do need to bring something forward on how to address that, so people aren't going to just a food truck instead of the brick and mortar restaurant. Or is that what council wants? Council needs to weigh in on some kind of policy there and make a decision on what that would look like. Because I think it would be great, but I don't want it to compete with existing businesses. So we had a request once, and it was right next to an existing restaurant, and that's not the best location for a food truck. But if we have a location where we can put multiple food trucks and they're not competing, and often they don't, it's a different product, we think it's a great idea. But we do need to establish a policy on that. We don't have one. Other municipalities do, and it's relatively easy for us to put a recommendation together on that separately from this and bring that forward also.
Is there any further discussion from those people virtually that want to shortchange you? Alderman Spaghettis, you okay?
I support the plan for a trial period.
Okay. All right. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, we'll take a little break here.